All right, let's get started. So I was talking to a few of the people that came in early. I always start early, so if anybody wants to come chit chat, please feel free to join early. It sounds like the weight of the semester has started. It's been a bit of a weird week for a lot of people, I feel like. A lot of stress. And those of you that are getting ready to graduate, it's that much more compounded in terms of stress. So hopefully this class is not too stressful, although I'm probably about to add some stress because I'm going to share my screen and there's a few things that I want to talk about um, here. So let me see, because we're going to talk about career stuff in a second. But um, sorry, I'm waiting for this thing to disappear again. Okay. So this week we just have the reading for today and then a discussion board for that, right, under week 2. But I do want you to be thinking ahead of week 3 because I'm going to ask you to turn in your CV to me, and I'm going to talk about that in now, right? So I'm asking you to turn in a CV. If you've never done a CV, I'm going to show you what some of the basics of it are. But if you're not going to go into teaching, if you're not going to graduate school, you don't need a CV, the curriculum vitae. You need a resume. So if you already know you're not going to go into teaching, then I will take a resume. I just want you to have something that you already have. If you've already have it, like those of you that have already applied to graduate school, you probably already have a CV. Chances are then that you don't have to do much to that before you submit it, and you can submit it now if you want it, right? Um, it's up to you to decide which one you're going to submit to me. And I just want the basics on there on the CV. You know, I'm not going to grade you on like how good your CV is, like how many things you have on there. It's going to be at either you did it or you did not here. But if I think that your CV needs, some work, I might ask you to go take it to the Career Center people to get somebody to help you with it before I give you a grade, right? So I'm not going to fail you, but I'm going to ask you to take an extra step if I see that you need a lot of help with it, right? Because I'm not an expert, right? I'm not an expert on resumes and CVs, but I can get you started if you've never done one before, right? And I will allow you to include with your CV or resume an explanation of why you think, if you think it's too bare bones, that you don't have enough, then explain to me how you're going to fill that out, right? What are your plans? I don't need you to have, every detail or um, uh, your resume doesn't need to be ready to be sent to jobs right now, but you should have something that you can work off of is the goal of this assignment, right? Because some of you might have never done one, and so I really want you to have it at the very least, right? The Career Center has some options to help you with that, especially with resumes. They have workshops all semester long, so you want to take advantage of that, even though it's all like virtual. But if you're going into teaching or into academia in any way, you are going to need a CV, right? And for that, we want to talk a little bit about what those differences are. So, does someone want to do a quick summary of what the difference between the CV and the resume is? No, no one. Everybody's like, no, I don't expect you all to know this because I didn't know this when I was, even in graduate school. It was through graduate school that I had to learn what the difference is. The main reason, one of the main differences you'll see is the look of it is a little bit different, but um, a resume can be used for any number of jobs, whereas the CV is mainly for academic purposes, right? Most jobs don't require a CV, right? The CV can be long. It can be long. It doesn't. There's no page limit on a CV, right? Whereas a resume should really be, for you all, it should really be one page, maximum 2 pages. But for somebody that's just starting a career applying for jobs, it should be one page. You don't have enough stuff typically to fill out 2 pages, and you don't need to have enough stuff for 2 pages. But the CV is longer, right? The format, oftentimes, there's There's some guidelines for what each one of those should have. And so what I linked in here is a career page from UC Davis that I thought was pretty clear about what kind of sections you need in your CV as opposed to like a resume. Right. So if you're going into teaching, then you definitely want to look into this. The main thing with a CV is that you're emphasizing your education and you're emphasizing whatever experience you have with academia, with teaching. Right. Whereas in a resume, you would want to just list like basically jobs, experience. And if you don't have enough job experience, then internships, volunteer work, things you've done that can translate into the work setting. Right? Whereas in academia, you don't need to have had a job necessarily. It's just whatever experience you have with um, with the academia, right? So, for example, something like doing research, right? Research project is something that would go on your CV, but would not go on your resume necessarily, unless it's relevant. Right? So this website, look through it if you need help getting started with it, just in terms of like it gives you some examples to look at, some details, right? So let me stop sharing really quick. How many of you have a CV, a curriculum vitae?
I have one.
There we go. And I'm like, I would expect you to have one. Anybody else? No. Okay. So for sure, because I know some of you are intending a career in teaching, you want one. So what I will do is I'm going to show you mine with the caveat of like, this is not the most stellar example. This is not, I'm not telling you that this is the best way to do it. I'm just giving you a place to start. Right? Just a place to start, because I know when I started, the number one thing I needed was a visual example. Like, how do I even start doing this? Once you have some basics down of how to organize it, then you can start playing with style and like, what font I'm going to use and what order I'm going to put things in. Right. So don't take this as this is exactly how you have to do it. Okay. I'm like, sound good. We're not going to take it literally, but it's going to be just an example. Okay. Then let me share it on here. All right, so I put it. I actually was looking at my CV this weekend because I had to turn in an evaluation for Cal State LA, and the number one thing that goes in your CV is your education. That should be at the very top. What degrees you have. So obviously, I have, because I have my doctorate, right, my master's and my bachelor's. So this is the most people will have on there. You won't have all of that, but and even if you haven't graduated, you want to put your bachelor's on here. What you would do would just be expected. You would put expected so that any employer or anywhere you're submitting your CV knows that you haven't received that degree yet, but graduation's coming up, right? So you put something like that. I'm taking that out on here. For a lot of you, you're double majoring or you're minoring, and you want to say that, right? You want to say what your minor is, um, so that it's known, right? You can see like any of you. Well, some of this is not relevant, but you can see like I put my dissertation title for my doctorate, right? I've chosen to put next honors and affiliations. That's pretty typical for people to put in. So any scholarships you've received, anything like that. If you're a member of any of the honor societies, right? I put in here the P Delta Phi Honor Society at Cal Lutheran. So anything and all things that you've won as scholarships, if you made the dean's list, anything like that should go under honors and affiliations, right? Even if you haven't won it, on some of you, like some grants and scholarships will tell you that you were the runner up, and you wouldn't have put that on there. You put the whatever the award was, and you just put runner up and the year, right? So something like recipient of whatever the award was, and then the year you received it, right? Does that make sense? I'm like that part is usually straightforward, but you can ask questions about that. Like in this one, where it's just the honor society, I didn't put a year. I just put the honor society, and now I'm looking at it. I'm like, why didn't I put a year? But you know, whatever. And I went on here and like I left stuff from undergrad. You can see that like, all right, after I finished grad school, I'm like, all right, the scholarships ended, so so I don't have anything else in there after that. And some people have this right after their education teaching experience, right? So any teaching you've done, if you've been a research assistant, you would have that in a different place, right? So if you've helped any professor do research, especially if it was paid, but even if it was not paid, you would create a separate category where you would put research experience, right? So something like, so this one would be for teaching. Let's say you don't have any teaching experience, you just haven't done any of it, and then you might just put work experience, right? That's fair at the beginning when you're just starting out and you might not have any teaching experience, so you would put work experience, right? And then some of the rules, this is where you can just use some of the general guidelines of what to put here, right? A lot of the rules they tell you is to put active verbs, right? You don't want to put, you don't want to use past tense. And you want to, or not always, some, I have some past tense in here. You just want to make everything active so that it stands out on there. And you would change these from time to time, right? This is very much teaching focused. So here I just have like listing classes I've taught. But if I were applying for jobs outside of teaching, like I would totally change that and instead focus on some of the skills that are required to do that job, right? Under each job, right? So the format I went with was the job title, then the place where the job was at, and then the dates. Mm. Some people will put like the dates first or the organization that they taught at first, right? Um, see what else under teaching experience, any tutoring you did, you want to put that under, that's teaching experience, right? And I know like a lot of us start tutoring pretty early on, right? Like I think my very first job ever was tutoring and I started doing it in middle school. I haven't put that on here, but but you would want to put that even if it was way back in middle school, right? You put that on there so that you're filling out with things that are relevant, right? I can't get to the chat right now, but I'm like, I'll get to whatever the comment was in a second. Research experience. So this one might be a little bit trickier for some of you because you feel like you don't have any research experience. You actually do, because you've been doing research papers in every history class you've done. You've been doing research papers. So think about where you've done that research, right? Even online research experience might be relevant, but especially, the Cal State LA Archive, right? The special collections up there. If you've done any research up there, you want to include it in your CV. Like if you've done any research at the presidential libraries, like I didn't put that on here, but when I applied to grad school, um, I I had done research at the Ronald Reagan Library for a graduate student in France who needed some paperwork there. And it was a 1 day thing. I went for 1 day, I scanned a bunch of papers, and then I mailed them to this grad student in France. That was all I did. It felt really insignificant, but that's research experience, right? I knew how to get to the archives at a presidential library, right? Now, let's say you don't have any of that. Let's say you can't think of anything, you don't have any of that. Aha. Now you know, though, what things you might want to do that will fill out a space there, right? You're some of you are working on capstone papers, right? Why not try to go to one of the research libraries, to one of the presidential libraries, or to the LA archives, right? Why not try to go, right? They right now it's probably more difficult because of COVID restrictions, But I bet it's not impossible to get access to some of the local ones. And a lot of them, it's really easy to do, you know, to stay the 8 feet apart that for the guidelines to wear the masks. And then voila, you have a line in your CV, right? Academic service. So a lot of you like are part of clubs and organizations, right? That all the clubs and organizations can count as academic service. For your professors, a lot of it is more like, you know, when they serve in different committees and things like that. You won't have a ton of that stuff, but like if you're part of student government, you want to put that there, things like that. Right. So on mine, for example, like I like leaving this thing in here that I was part of this decade program when I was a graduate student, because one of the hardest things for people to prove in like job applications and interviews is a commitment to diversity. A lot of, especially educational jobs, will ask you to submit something um, in in written form, or at least when during the interview process, they will ask you about, you know, commitment to diversity. What's your commitment to diversity? And you don't want to come in and just say like, "Hello, non-white person." One of the ways that you show that you actually care about the topic of diversity is like getting involved in organizations and in clubs where that is the focus. And that shows evidence, right, that you've done that you actually care. Okay. Conference presentations. So many of you might not have gone to conferences, but if you made any kind of like organized presentation, right? Some of your professors organize like exhibits, organize talks, right? Last semester, the big data freshman courses presented their research to the city of LA and to Cal State LA members of the community, right? And I told them, I was like, you have to put this in your resume, because this is an official presentation, and this wasn't even just presenting to class. You presented this to the community on campus and to the city of LA, right? So if you've ever done that for a class, you put that there, right? You want to make sure you put that. In fact, I had like, when I was looking over this, I was like, I haven't gone to a conference in years now, or presented at a conference. I was like, aha, but last year I gave that talk for Compton Unified School District and it wasn't on my CV yet. And I was like, why has it been a whole year and I haven't put that on my CV? Right. And I wanted to highlight that because one of the things that I'm very bad at is adding things as you do them. Whether it's on a CV or a resume, you want to add things as you do them so you don't forget to put them on there. Right. And then lastly, I put languages last, but you want to like say what level of fluency you have. So most of you are at least bilingual. Some of you are trilingual or more, and you want to put that there. Although you want to make a distinction, like if you're not fluent in Spanish, you don't want to, you know, say you're fluent. You can put semi-fluent or read Spanish rather than like speak it, or just speak Spanish rather than write it, because you know, I don't believe in lying on your resume. I do believe in like stretching the truth a little bit, but not necessarily lying there. So what do you think? Some of you, so a lot of you actually have resumes. What have you noticed looking at mine here? What would you say are the main differences in terms of, now that you're looking at it, between a resume and CV?
I notice it's just a resume for only education. It acts the same way, but it's just very specific to education.
Yeah, and like I said, so a lot of you might not have teaching experience, although some of you do. But if not, you don't have that section, and instead you put work experience. So I remember doing that when I was applying to graduate school. I had a section that said just work experience, and I want them to know like, hey, I've been working and you know, doing my undergrad at the same time. That's valuable for them to know, like, hey, I worked, I studied, and I still got really good grades. Mm, that's important and valuable. Right. I was also talking, I hope Yitzhak doesn't mind me mentioning him, but Yitzhak and I were talking about resumes and how to fill them out the other day. There are things you don't even realize that are really valuable that you've done, right? Like I had mentioned, I know a lot of your professors like to organize exhibits at the library, to curate art exhibitions at the gallery. If you have exhibited anything, if you have helped organize any of that, you put that on your resume and on your
I have a quick
CV.
question, Ms. Cardona.
Yeah.
So all this resume is online, right? Your example is in the module.
Hmm. Oh, no. Thank you for saying that. My example is not on there because I'm very like, I don't want to show anybody my stuff. Self-conscious about it, but I can put that on there. I'll put that on there because I know if you've never done one and you want to try making a CV, I will link mine on there. In fact, I'm writing myself a note to do that as soon as this class is done.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I noticed at the top you put the Cal State LA address. Do we need to put our own address there?
Yes, I put the Cal State LA mostly because I don't want to tell you where I live.
Oh yeah, of course.
And
But
I'm like, I don't want to getting text messages. But normally you would put if you don't want to tell someone where you live, you could put the a work address. You could put a current work address, but a phone number, I would suggest you put your cell phone number, whatever, whichever way is easier to get a hold of you. It's unlikely that they would try to reach you just through the information on the CV or the resume. They would put whatever you put on the application would be how they would reach out to you. But
okay.
it as far as last time I went to these workshops, right? They you want to put that information usually multiple places so that there's no doubt about how to get a hold of you.
Okay.
But I know like some people might, especially because some address might be really obvious and which part of town you live in, and if you don't want people making assumptions about you, that might be a valid reason why you would not want your home address there. Right? Some people also just leave it out because they're applying to jobs that are out of state, for example, and you don't want your employer to know that you're out of state yet. Eventually you're going to have that conversation, but that's another reason why people leave it. For like graduate school applications, that's not an issue. Obviously they expect out of state people. Yeah. So really like a lot of it is just the trick of like sitting down and like thinking of, oh, what the hell kind of experience can I put on these things. And sometimes it takes a few days of just like walking around and thinking, what else did I do? I was like, because you're thinking, I haven't done anything. But when you sit down and think of the things you've done for classes, that can go on a resume, right? Some of your professors have you do podcasts. That's relevant experience, right? Because you never know when you're applying for a job where they really need somebody to work on the, on the employer podcast. Right? Or you have experience with like web development, website development. That's something that's actually really useful even in history, in teaching jobs, because of how important digital humanities has become. Right? So if you know any programming, you put that on there. If you know,
Professor.
yeah.
So I have a question. So I saw all the CV. I see it's all the experience from like usually from like university or like college experience.
Mhm.
So, but like I used to being like private tutoring and also like also during high school I've been being like a tutor, like going to like classes to like helping the in other like students. Do you think it's like possible to like put them on the CV?
Absolutely. And in fact, if you have that much tutoring experience, I would even create it into its own section. Right. And maybe that's something where you will actually want to make an appointment with a career center and ask them about it because they have more of the latest conventions. But I would put it in its entire tutoring experience heading, and I would put all the different kinds of tutoring that you've done.
I see.
Right. Because you probably have tutored in various subjects.
Yeah.
And that one of the things that speaks to is how well-rounded you might be. Right? I don't just know history. I can teach writing. I've tutored kids about writing essays.
Yeah, like I've been tutoring like different subjects before.
Yeah, and that will be something that might look really well depending on who the employer is that's looking at it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Professor, I have a question.
Mhm.
Would preschool education also count?
What do you mean, like like where you went to preschool or
No,
that you
no, no.
worked at a?
No. I helped with a research project for early
Ah,
preschool development. And also, actually, volunteered at early preschool development as well.
absolutely. You want, whatever it might be, you want employers to know that, you want graduate schools to know that's all relevant experience, even if it's not, it doesn't seem to fit exactly on what you're currently applying for. You never know when someone's seeing that you have a little bit of experience doing something else will come in handy. Yeah, like I've had students that, like, will apply for one thing, but what jumps out at the employer is some other minor thing they have on there. Right? I'm like, you never know, but as long as you're not making things up, I think you want to include most of those things in. Right. For those of you that need a little bit more help, let me share my screen again. I really encourage you to go to the career centers workshops. You sign up through them now, through the Handshake app. I got their email last week that they were doing a resume workshop, and that you sign up for it through the Handshake. Do you all have Handshake accounts?
Is that the account we made on our orientation?
It might be. If you don't have a handshake account, you go through the Career Center website. So maybe I'll link this on Canvas too for those of you who might not have it yet. Let me go through it. So I even actually right now, if you go through my CalState LA portal, it's like right there. That's how I got to it. I was like, oh wait, it's on my CalState LA portal. I'll just click on it right now. Um, Let me click on it. So right here, over here on the right hand side, right, it says internships, jobs, career events, Handshake. If you click on that, it'll take you to their website, and this is where like all the Career Center is organizing all their workshops, right? Like here it is, Career Center, connect with the experts, and it's not just the website; it has events, right? So they're having virtual career fairs, all this stuff, and they'll be adding more stuff as things get confirmed. But the other reason you want the Handshake account is because employers use this app to specifically promote jobs for Cal State LA students. Right. And if you look through it, the main reason I wanted to show you is not just so you know all of this, but that some of you are have already decided that like teaching is not going to be your thing. You chose this the a teaching specialization for history a while ago, and now you've decided it's probably not going to be your thing, and that's okay. I'm like, that's okay. So the big question is like, okay, you're a history major, you're graduating, you don't want to teach. So what are you going to do? And I've noticed that with undergrads, you get a lot of the same question that we got told in graduate school. You're not going to teach. Well, think about a library or an archive. You can work out those. Some of you, if you've gone to those workshops, you can't just choose to work at an archive or a library. That's a whole other career path and whole other degree that you would need, experience in. And the thing that I like to remind all of you is that for a lot of jobs, it doesn't matter what you majored in. It just doesn't. Right? There's a kind of cultural capital that comes with saying I'm a teacher. Right? When you tell someone you're a teacher, like they have particular ideas, and a lot of times it comes with a lot of respect. It doesn't come with a lot of money, but it can come with a lot of respect. And it's that other jobs don't have. But that doesn't mean you can't do other jobs. right? Like when students tell me what do I apply for, I'm like anything and everything else. Like some of these jobs that I was looking on here, I was like, okay, some of them you need like a special, like, date. Oh, actually, this might not be bad. Where, let's see, I'm trying to go where I went last time. The full-time jobs on here I went. You're probably not interested in internships unless it's going to be like for the summer. You're probably interested in full-time jobs if that's what you're worried about, right? So here's one, like entry-level accounting clerk. Or you're thinking, I don't have an accounting major. Most of the time they are looking for accounting majors in those, not all the time, but you're also probably not going to have the experience needed for a medical surgical nurse. So that's not, there are some teacher jobs on here. Where's the one I was going to show you? A product planner. Oh, well, here's one. Product planner. I'm like, a job like this, you don't need a specific kind of major. You just need a bachelor's for a job like this. It's an entry level job, so you don't even need to have a ton of experience, right? They say on here.
Kate, are you gonna post that link in the website? It's already linked, right? The one, the
It's
website.
not linked yet. It's not linked,
Oh.
but I will post it on there.
Okay,
I
thank you.
realized I'm missing some stuff like this. Like they're looking for entry level stuff. Even jobs that say you need 1 or 2 years experience. A lot of times, even if you have 0 experience, you have a shot at it. Let's see what else. Coordinators, stuff that are like coordinator, you can apply for. Like this one, they might need clinical experience, so probably not something like this, but any other jobs that have like the title of coordinator, they usually all you need is a bachelor's. Resource and referral program supervisor, that would be something that you probably only need a bachelor's for. Marine science technician, probably not, right? But other things like, where was one? Sometimes researchers. There's all kinds of companies that need researchers. They're not super well-paying jobs, but there are things like that actually a history major is ideal for, because you have so much experience researching. But here's one where I was any kind of administrative work. You literally don't need a specific major for that. You don't need a specific major. Even something like legal administrative specialist, you might not need like a lot, like to be in law school even, because it's an office job, right? And I'll stop sharing for a second, but a lot of office jobs now require bachelor's degrees. A lot of office jobs require bachelor's degrees, but you don't need any kind of other specialized training to work in an office, right? Even at doctor's offices. My sister is currently working at a dermatologist office. She just graduated from college with a finance degree. Does she need a finance degree to work at a dermatologist office? No. She got hired too with the hope that they would let her work on some of their marketing stuff, because she's especially interested in marketing, and they had liked that she had experience with marketing because they were going to revamp their logos and all of their marketing. But she doesn't need that kind of degree. And it was so hard for me, by the way, to like shake my sister. And she started college as a Spanish major, and then all her friends were business majors. And so she felt like the only way to get a job after college was to be a business major. And I just really wanted to shake her the whole time she was in college, because she's not good at math. She's not good at math. Why was she a finance major? She barely, I'm like, don't tell my sister I'm saying these things. She barely graduated.
Wait,
I'm
what's
like,
what's her Instagram? Just
That's
kidding.
what I said. But she's doing great now. But I'm like, she has a job. It pays the bills. She's living on her own. So she can pay her apartment and pay most of her bills. She will sometimes text me asking me for coffee money, but that's fine for when you just graduated. All right. I don't want anybody, I'm hoping that I can, one of the things I'm getting across is that you don't need to, you haven't painted yourself in a corner by being a history major, that you don't need to go to grad school. Don't need to go into teaching. And actually, right now, you're in the best position to shift gears and do something else. Right. I was talking to my friend who lives in Korea, and we have a mutual friend who did we met her in graduate school. She did her master's in anthropology. And she just finished interviewing for Netflix. And in fact, I know her next job is going to be as a producer for one of the streaming services. She didn't get the job at Netflix, but she made it to the final interview where there were just two of them with a master's in anthropology. You don't need a specific degree, right? And in 10 years, you might be doing something completely different to what you imagined. Right, like for her it was just being open to it. She started working for a magazine in South Korea where she was writing articles, and then because of that she realized she was really good at editing. Right now she's working for a publishing company as an editor, but she manages a group of people, and it's that managing, working with writers, that got her the interview at Netflix. And I'm just like, you never know where you're going to end up. You just have to be open to it and embrace the scariness, because it's really scary, right? When I remember senior year and how freaked out I was until I got my acceptance letter for graduate school. And actually, I think it's a better position to be rethinking your career path at the end of college than it is like at the end of graduate school. I felt a lot scarier at the end of graduate school, and I realized I was not going to get a tenure track job. Right? So I'm like, I'm not a career coach, so I'm not an expert on any of these things. But if anybody has any questions or need any kind of motivation, I'm a good No, I'm not a good cheerleader, but I'm good at motivation. No? Okay, then raise of hands. Who's scared about what they're going to end up doing after college? I'm like, I want to. I'm like, a few of you are less scared because you already know, but even some of you who actually have something lined up, scary. But you're on the same. I'm like, it's not just you, right? It's not just you; it's everyone. Yeah. So I'm like, if you ever need any additional motivation, come talk to me. So no other questions or comments or tips. Like I said, I don't have all the answers on the CV and resume, but any tips on those of you that have written have already a working CV or resume? No. So you can send me for everything you submit to me. I always accept drafts. So if you'd like me to take a look at a CV or resume before you submit it, I'm happy to take a look at it. Like I said, I'm not an expert on it, but I can tell you, yeah, I'm going to ask you to redo this, or nope, this will be good enough to submit to me. Right? The goal is not to have the perfect CV or the perfect resume that you submit to me. I just want you to have it and have something that's functional and that you can edit, add to, work off of. Right? Like, so it's more about get it done. And in fact, get it done earlier rather than later. All right, now that I have finished freaking you all out, let's talk about the reading for today. Let's go back to history and talking shit about things like we like to do in history. Don't we? It's a lot of what we do. It's a lot of what grad school ends up being too. Okay, so this chapter I have to tell you that I assigned for today from the book. This is so from the Why Learn History when it's already on your panel. Was my least favorite chapter, but I'm hoping that you guys got something out of it. What was the point of this chapter? No, no one. What was the argument?
It was critiquing people's history and
Yeah.
how, at the time it was like a breakthrough because it was from the bottom up. So it was like a social school of history, and everyone was like raving about it. But I guess this author had a little bit of critiquing to do with it because it left out a lot of. It was like basically all interpretation with no real primary source and backing.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's back up a little bit. How many of you have read Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States?
I have.
I'm like, it's a widely popular book. A lot of just people who are just generally interested in history will read it. What did you think when you read it, Derek?
Personally, I liked kind of its newer approach. It does kind of come from more of a like left of center perspective, which a lot of historians that are more conservative don't necessarily agree with what Mr. Zinn has to say, although his point of view is vastly different from what we traditionally receive in I guess like traditional schooling growing up. I think it was like it became part of my high school curriculum, and like 2 of my other classes in college required me to use it. And I like it, especially in this reading, it kind of does really ring a bell. When I really sat back and thought about what I had read in People's History, was that it's more of a book filled with criticism, or that's critical of history, but it doesn't necessarily, again, kind of address any of those underlying issues of teaching, the core essentials, or the truth about history. It just says, hey, everyone else is wrong, and I know they're wrong, and this is what I think about them being wrong. It was kind of like a really bad Yelp review of history as as a curriculum. But yeah, I think it was, again, the book itself is more critical than anything else, without bringing in like a lot of, it could have just as easily been a platform that brought forth a lot of documents and like kind of untold stories. So much more, I think it could have been elaborated on, but again, it is almost like a political critique of history, again, as a curriculum, and how we look at things as a society from a historical perspective, and what we value, like stories that we want to hear about.
Yeah, no, and that was the value of Howard Zinn's book at the time and when it was discovered by people, right? That it did challenge the kind of traditional narrative, the traditional story of how history of the United States was taught, right? As kind of just glorifying, right, the founding fathers, and glorifying the, World War One and World War Two and all of that. And Howard Zinn was basically said, all of that you've been taught, it's all a lie. Right? It was all built on a lie, and he was not wrong about a lot of the things that he included in that book. But our author Weinberg has a lot of critiques of that book. Some of them, some of his critiques, I think, go a little too far, but the others are very, very valid, right? So some of you have already mentioned some of them. What are some of the things that Weinberg critiques about Howard Zinn?
His unwillingness to correct the things that he got wrong.
Yeah,
Even though like the Soviet Union archives and like the archives US had on the Soviet Union had been released, and rather than talk about how he got it wrong, he's like, well, I don't really care about like whether they were guilty or not. I care about the trial, that they didn't get a fair trial. And it's like that wasn't really the thing you were trying to present to begin with. So to say that that's what you were trying to present all along is kind of disingenuous.
Weird. Yeah, and he's actually caught in, because Howard Zinn based his entire book on secondary sources, not any primary sources. There were a couple of times where like any historian who was keeping up with the latest developments would know when reading Howard Zinn, actually this is wrong. We have a source that's available now that completely contradicts the point you're making here. right? So Weinberg goes into a couple of those details of like, hey, this is actually wrong, right? Yeah. What are other critiques that Weinberg brings up? So no, yeah.
Oh, like a critique that I think I read was him equating things, but for I don't know how like explain it. Like he's like saying, "Oh, these guys are bad, but look at us, the democratic countries. We're also bad. Like, how can you like say that type of things?"
Some like equivalency issues that people might have a problem with. Yeah. Also some of the narrative, just the story, when things don't quite fit into his narrative,
He'll
things
mix
don't
stuff.
fit, right? So for example, World War II, right? When
Yeah.
apparently in the World War II section, or who was gonna, Christian?
Oh yeah, in the World War II section, he omits information like I'm not an expert on World War II, but I took the class with Professor Painich, and one of the first things we learn about is like the invasion of Poland and Warsaw, and how it was brutal. It's literally just kill everything in sight, kill like no mercy, all this. And then he says like, oh, look what they did to Dresden, where it's it's not right to bomb civilian cities, but at the same time to say talk about this and then don't talk about what the Nazis did, I think is disingenuous, and it's a false equivalency. And this not I wouldn't say necessarily false equivalency, but no, it kind of is.
It's
Like, to me,
but
if
it's
you
a
were gonna
comparison that doesn't work.
like,
Yeah.
and then one of the other critiques they bring up is like how he equates Jim Crow to the treatment of Jews and that. But like, to me, if you were gonna make the argument, I feel like you could have done it better by equating like the genocide of Native Americans rather than just Jim Crow.
Yeah.
And I think one of the bigger issues that they bring up in the article is like the way he frames his questions, like to like students.
Yeah.
And even I had an issue with it. 'Cause it's like it's yes or no. And from all the classes I've taken here, like at Cal State LA, especially Professor Andy, it's more like there's more nuance than just saying like, oh, this is right and this is wrong. Like, not necessarily a middle ground either, but it's like a mixture of like this side and this. Like, it's never just black and white. It's never just this or that. So, and the way he frames his questions is alarming to me. Like, I didn't like it. I didn't like the questions that they
Absolutely. Derek, were you gonna add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's the same. It's kind of it's like in journalism, it's really a lot of framing that goes on in Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. He omits certain specific information from different sections, and then like in the World War II section, it's the same thing. Again, a lot of, I guess, more like left-leaning historians also leave out a lot of what the Soviet Union did, and they kind of paint them as like, oh, they're equal heroes in this instance of, or they're gonna, they defeated the Nazis and stuff like that, but they kind of forget that, or they omit information or kind of glass over the fact that they had agreed, to basically split Poland with the Nazis. And when they came in and, especially because we had the World War II history class with Dr. Painick, we got to read a lot of those books that, just kind of highlighted the plight of the Polish people, how they were kind of just hung out to dry by the Allies and were forced to fend off both the Nazis and the Soviets largely by themselves. And I feel like certain stories like that, again, are kind of glossed over or just not paid attention to because it doesn't necessarily fit their narrative of like, these guys are clear cut, black and white. These are the bad guys in this scenario, where there's a lot more kind of like gray, where there's things that, Britain's bombing of civilians in Germany. And it's like, oh, that is equally as bad as Germany dropping bombs on, like Great Britain. But, it's one of those scenarios where history is written by the victors, and it kind of really is. Like, realistically, no one cares, or no one, promotes, like Nazism or anything like that after the fact. If the Nazis had came out on top in World War II, historians in general would have a different view of it. Same thing in like ancient Greek and Rome. Rome is seen as this great, mighty empire, but it's like there was a horrible, horrible society when you get down to the core issues of like slavery and like, you know, getting into this history of gladiators and stuff like that, and the Roman political system and corruption. And, you know, a lot of people, they glorify Julius Caesar, and it's like there was a reason he was kind of stabbed to death on the Senate floor.
So
But
yeah, so it's a problem of two different things, right? Of one, of what questions you're asking, right? You are all taught that, you know, when you approach research, you're approaching it with questions, right? And if you approach it with a yes or no question, it's like you are creating the answer in the question, right? By saying yes or no, then there's not a whole lot of room for nuance, right? That's why you're all getting like, you know, hammered over the head by, you know, your capstone and research professors saying like, no, your research questions have to be broad enough to really get to something there, but in narrow enough that you're not saying like, what happened?
yeah,
Right? So it's tricky when asking those questions, but the way that one of the objections here is that the way that those questions are framed in the Howard Zinn book leads students to believe that there's a right and a wrong answer, and that that's not really what we want to teach in history. We don't want to teach there's a right and wrong. We want to teach, hey, this you can interpret this, right? There's room for interpretation, or there's nuance here.
yeah, there isn't a correct interpretation. Like there is just us interpreting it for what it is and taking a step back as historians and being critical of you know, all sides realistically.
And then the other problem is that of narrative. When you're writing a book, right, or when you're teaching a lesson on a particular topic, you want to tell a story.
Yeah.
Right? If you're just teaching facts, oh, boring, right?
Yeah, it's going to
You do
read
wanna-
like stereo instructions.
But you do want to tell a story. But the problem when you tell a story is, what do you do with the things that don't fit into your story?
You leave them out.
And largely we leave them out, right? But that's a problem when you're trying to tell the whole history of the United States. Leaving things out is it's just problematic, right? Because someone else would not choose to leave out the things that you're choosing to leave out, and so it will create problems where experts on particular time periods and particular topics will call you out and say, no, that's wrong, right? Now, it would be one thing if like Howard Zinn's, okay, his book is out there, it's popular, so what? Except that it has been integrated into the curriculum so much. There's a
Yeah.
whole like educational materials that have evolved out of the Howard Zinn book. And I want to show you, because for the discussion board this week, I'm going to ask you to take a look at the website that was built around, let me see, is that, no, that's the wrong one I'm going to. That was built around Howard Zinn's book. So I think it's under assignments too, actually, going the long way. This discussion board. I'm going to ask you to take a look at the website and see if you find anything of value. Because here's the problem for the practicalities of teaching, right? You can have very lofty goals. You can have ideas about how you're going to change the way history is taught. But what materials are you going to use? Because it's not just about coming up with the lectures or the PowerPoints you use, it's also the activities you're going to use, the sources you're going to use. One person coming up with all of that on their own is a huge project. It's a huge project. And so this is where projects like this one, like the one around Howard Zinn, can be really useful, because they're telling you, you know, there's a new way of teaching history, and here's useful teaching material that will work in the classroom. Right. And so, you know, you can explore by that time period and theme. And there are things in here that you might find useful, especially in a crunch when you're like, oh shit, I need a lesson plan and I don't have that much time, and they've already put together something on here, right? Like one of the things that has been in a lot of people's minds recently is the civil rights movement. And I'm like, I have such a problem with the way like I was taught the civil rights movement. But this one is interesting, right? So they have here a lesson on teaching the FBI's war on the Black Freedom Movement. that might be really interesting to me to talk about the way that the government surveilled activists and the civil rights and people we glorify and celebrate today that were enemies of the state, right? At this point. Um, and I'm like, actually, I might be really interested in this. This might be really useful for me to assign, to get activities from. And look, they even have stories of like teachers talking about their experience with teaching this particular item. You can download out teaching resources. They even have things in Spanish, bilingual resources. Some of these things are like, are you going to translate a document all on your own for the classroom?
If I can, yes.
Yes, you can.
Might have to, but it's not ideal.
It's not ideal. I come across that problem of translation a lot because a lot of like the stuff I studied for like my dissertation is in French. But on the abortion movement in France, and I have a lot of really cool sources that haven't been translated. And I can't assign it to students who don't read French. And what I have found too is that I don't have time to sit there and translate sources.
Yeah.
Translating requires a whole other set of skills, and it's time consuming. And also, I'm not going to pay someone to do it because I don't want to pay everyone to
Because I don't make that much money.
And this is, I think, that here's the problem for those of you that are going to teach that will keep running across is like, okay, so I won't teach history that way. Great. So what are the resources that are available if I don't want to teach it that way? Right? And that's where one of the things I would ask you to turn in at the very, very end of the semester, I'll start introducing now, is a database of resources. Because that was even the most useful thing that I did as a grad student. One professor had me do a whole thing on how I was going to teach things with links that I could go to, a list of movies that could be used in the classroom, a list of songs that I could use in the classroom, so that you have something to fall back on when you're looking for material. Right? Because in teaching, like if somebody already created something that works, then you don't have to redo it. You shouldn't. You're wasting your time if you're coming up with something from scratch and somebody already did it. Right? You can tweak though. You can always tweak and adjust all the material you find. Right? So that's what I'm going to ask you to do for one of the questions the discussion board is look through the Howard Zins project and see if what you're finding is mostly stuff that you think is usable. If you think it's stuff that falls into the trap, the criticism that Weinberg talked about in the book, or if it's stuff that maybe just needs adjustments. Maybe it just needs an adjustment and it would work. Or you can totally trash it too.
Yeah. Let's just not reinvent the wheel. If it works.
Yeah, fortunately for us, as we read more of Weinberg, he's going to give us more useful resources, more than just criticism. Here's the problem I find with just criticizing something is like, okay, but what's the alternative? If you're telling me that's bad, then give me something good too, right? I hate if all you're going to do is criticize, and I find it not useful when it comes to teaching. I'm like, that's not useful. Give me something to actually do. Right? Some, like for those of you that are going to go into teaching, there are programs to help give you resources. One of the things I had just added to my CV was there's a lot of a few programs that work bringing specialists in the field, people with PhDs, professors, to talk to K through 12 teachers about what the latest research is on certain topics. Right? Because every few decades history gets rewritten. It's like a constantly updating thing. And if you're teaching K through 12, you might not have time to attend conferences all the time. You're certainly not getting paid to attend conferences all the time. And so how do you maintain currency in the field, right? How do you stay current with the latest research, the latest information that's coming out? And one of the things that the organizers of that program had talked to me about was not just presenting a lecture on information, but also like bring a source to the event that teachers could use. And I'm like, aha, that's much more useful than just, I'm a professor, this is my area of specialties, and I'm going to come tell you information. Right? It's information, but with also resources that are usable. And I'm like, for those of you that are going to go into those fields, to the field of teaching K through 12, that you want to pay attention when those opportunities come up, because it's usually paid. It's paid training that comes up, and I know it's not available everywhere, but when it comes up, you want to make sure you take advantage of things like that, because that's how teaching gets bogged down a lot of times. I know, like, one of the things that always comes up is like, and I'm like, I have to admit, one of my high school history teachers was the was one of the coaches. And I'm like, I don't remember anything from his class, actually. I can't say I did. I found my US history, my AP US history, much more useful, because it was taught by somebody who was like really good at, she was really good at what she did. And she, I think, used the latest stuff that was available on the material on how to teach American history. And yet I look back and I'm like, a lot of the things that the way they were taught are not the ways I would teach them now, because I have so much more information now. And I have more access to that, and because just certain things have changed. Right? Sometimes it's not even the fault of the teachers; it's just things has changed, and the curriculum hasn't been updated. Sometimes it's just as simple. I'm like, no one's actually doing anything wrong. It's just it hasn't trickled down into the curriculum and how it gets taught. Right? And when teachers are under so much pressure to meet, requirements and testing and all of that, there's not time to update curriculum. Right. So anything else that jumped out at you from Howard Zinn, or from the critique of Howard Zinn? Did anybody have any problems with the critique of Weinberg of Zinn? No, was I the only one?
I thought it was overly critical at some points. But I
Yeah.
can't say remember which one. I thought the one where they talk about how, because one of the things they didn't talk about is where they talk about like, oh, the U.S. wanted to drop the bomb before the USSR got involved. I thought that was a critique where I was like, I think you're kind of wrong there, in the sense where they did, because you have to, they didn't take into one of the things they didn't take into account is that beforehand, like FDR was the one that had told the USSR, like, yeah, like, if you help us invade like Japan, like, we'll give you all this territory. And then he died. So then like I forgot Truman. When Truman takes over, he's trying to like get away from that. Like, there's documents literally there of people telling him like, because he was kind of like a yes man, kind of taking like advice from everyone. So there was people telling him like, he had literally got the news of the bomb working, I think, at the Potsdam conference. So that's when he was like, okay, like, he's trying not to give the USSR any leverage. So like, he's trying to get it before that. So I thought that was kind of a critique where they didn't address that in the thing either. They had said no to that, but they never addressed it.
Yeah, actually.
I thought that was a critique that I thought was a little iffy.
Did anybody else agree with us? I agreed with that. I thought his critique of the way Zinn handles the atomic bomb and the choice to drop it was like, I don't know if I would be that hard on him for that critique.
Yeah, I would agree.
It was like, there's
one of the things when he said that there was four like conditions, and then when I look it up, like, I can't find that. Like, you have to look really hard to find it, and I still couldn't find it. It was just, there's even on Reddit, where Reddit literally like tells you everywhere to go. There's like, oh, this is all I can find. So it's so that's why I was like, I don't know where this information came from. So
that's funny. Maybe I need to start checking Reddit again. I used to check Reddit on whatever topic I was lecturing in each week, just to see what people were going to be finding on there.
But there's a lot they find. Like there really is a lot. Like, not everything is probably the most trustworthy, but there is a lot of information that they present that's at least like worth like checking
Yeah, and
out.
it's one of those places where like those discussions are happening. So I'm not anti-Reddit. I always think, let me type it into Reddit and see what's coming up. Any other stuff that jumped out at you from that reading? Priscilla?
I like one of the critiques when I was reading about how African American in World War II, how they were soldiers, how they were being treated, pretty poorly and stuff. And only like, I think 4.4% of African Americans were soldiers then. And that was like, what, 400 soldiers, according to the reading. And that he then exaggerated on the numbers and saying how, like, how this is how the whole community of African Americans felt, which I like that he kind of brought that up, Sam, about how he's generally basing all of that, how the African American felt on that part, but no, he didn't go overall based with the rest of the community.
And that's a good example of like where it's not that Howard Zinn was wrong. He wasn't wrong that African American soldiers, protested at the terrible treatment. But when you only tell that part of the story, you're missing the bigger picture, which is most of African Americans supported World War II. Right? There was one of those worlds that was widely supported, and there was very little like anti-war demonstration during that war. It was just like by the time the U.S. enters, it was just very clear, like people supported it, right? Because after the Pearl Harbor, right? It was similar to like after 9/11, with the country just unified around entering this war, right? Of course, the U.S. ends up focusing on Europe rather than Japan, which was responsible for Pearl Harbor. But I'm like, this is not a U.S. history class, so we're not. And I'm not a U.S. history expert, so we're not going to get into all of those details. But it's one of those of perspective, right? How do we present something, offering good perspective for students, right? So that they can be critical, but that they're also seeing the wider picture here. Right? We can talk about the discrimination faced by, African Americans and colonial troops in every army other than the German army. People of color served in all the armies, right? And they all face discrimination serving in the Allied armies. We can talk about that without discounting how supportive people were of the war and the war effort. Like that, you don't have to erase something in order to offer the perspective of other groups. That's where I fall on. I'm like, you can do both. You can both disturb the typical way of telling the story, and also like do it like historically correctly, right, without ignoring or telling too narrow of a view of history. So that's one of the things where I'm going to start pushing you on when we talk about more specific moments in history. I'm like, okay, how do we teach this though? How can we teach a really interesting story without losing track of everything else, or still telling a story in the narrative, which is hard to do. Okay, I'll stop now. And I'm like, wow, I always end this class really hard, really warm. And I'm like, if we were in a classroom, I would be super cold because the classrooms get really cold in the winter. I think it's because I have a ring light. Does anybody else have a ring light? No, I'm like, nobody warned me that ring lights get really, really hot. But okay, for Wednesday, you don't have any reading to do, but if you didn't do the reading, the chapter 3, then do that reading, because the discussion board due Sunday is based on this chapter. So if you didn't get to it, go back and get to it. I have a feeling some of you didn't.
I noticed.
Yeah, you're gonna hear from the same 3 people. No, not gonna lie.
So I'm gonna come back to a few of these points on Wednesday, so that I make sure everybody's prepared for the discussion board post on Sunday. But I won't take up all the class period on Thursday. All right, so I will let you all out early. We'll just touch on some things that I need to reiterate, get you all prepared for the coming assignments, and then give you time to work on those. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Yeah, and Austin, don't think I didn't notice you put Bernie back there. I was what because you heard me last time. I saw you last time too, but I wasn't able to say anything to you. But you're all free to go. But if anybody has any questions, stick around. And I've just reminded myself to link some of these things back up on Canvas.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
night.
Profe. Good night.
Oh, everybody just left.
Hello, Dr. Cardona.
Hi.
I had a, I guess it's not really a question, more so like advice. I'll turn on my video. I was eating in class and I don't know, sometimes I feel a little weird like eating and like having my video on. I feel like I'm like one of those YouTubers that just eats on camera.
Oh, I really hate actually when they do that.
Yeah.
But I don't mind here.
Yeah, me too. And I'm just like, I feel weird. But anyways, so you know that I applied to do my PhD, and so far I've heard back from 2 programs. I've heard back from USC and UCLA with somewhat similar funding packages. I think USC was their $32K for 5 years and UCLA is $30K for 6 years. So I think it kind of evens out in that sense. But then I'm always like questioning myself, especially now towards the end of my career. I mean, towards my end of the time in college, because I'm always like, this is really what I want to do for the rest of my life? And do I really want to put myself through 8 more years of this, especially because like my senioritis is kicking in and it's just kind of like, you know, I'm being very honest here, but like, I just kind of want to finish at this point.